Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel and the very last video in Halloween. When I say this week has been awesome for me, I honestly mean it. I actually changed my last video very last minute, so this is me on Friday after 5 full days so far of Halloween, having to kind of refilm. I've got a hair in my mouth. Anyways, so I just wanted to say thank you because I was really nervous about how this week was going to go. I feel like I really put myself in a box with missing persons cases and got kind of scared to do anything else and dive into different realms. Seeing the feedback this week and how much you guys have really enjoyed me kind of going off into things that matter a lot to me, that might be off the beaten path of what I normally do, it means so much to me. I can't even begin to explain to you how awesome it's been, and it's like this breath of fresh air that I've so desperately needed on my channel. I do plan on doing this again next year and hopefully kind of doing weeks of things more often, maybe every couple of months. We'll see how it goes. Before I dive right into today's video, I do want to quickly say as well that it is pouring rain outside. I've got a window and a drain literally right over here, so if you hear some weird banging noises and loud noises, it's just the rain. Unfortunately, I've been waiting now for about 7 hours to film and it hasn't let up, and I have to have this done, so I'm just diving into it when the rain is at least a little bit more calm. But now we can finally get on to today's video, and today's video is something that I feel like a lot of you have probably been waiting for. When I first talked about Halloween, I really wanted creepy content, something that I don't normally do, a lot of things revolving around Halloween, and a lot of you guys really wanted a lot of paranormal videos. I know that people that come to my channel might be interested in the paranormal, but based on a few videos paranormal wise that I've done, a lot of you just aren't, so I figured this topic today was actually a perfect video for both of you guys, for the best of both worlds. It's definitely something that has a lot of paranormal theories revolving around it, but there's also a lot of other theories that are more fact-based, and I feel like it's such an even idea on both sides that anyone could really watch this video and enjoy it. So today's video is on the Bennington Triangle. So the Bennington Triangle is an area that encompasses Bennington, Somerset, Shaftesbury, Woodford, all in the state of Vermont. And at the very center of this triangle is a mountain ghost town named Glastonbury, and it was once a small logging and charcoal town, but it ended up being abandoned at the very end of the 19th century. So the mountain itself is only about 10 miles away from Bennington, but it takes over an hour to get to this mountain because the forest is just so incredibly dense. Most of the Glastonbury area is very remote and has been incredibly untouched. There seemed to be this little abandoned town in the middle of it, and once that was gone, everything was just really quiet, and there's a few trails in the area. Other than that, it's very remote, which is really a lot to say because majority of Vermont is known to be incredibly remote in itself. So for the people of Vermont to say it's remote, it's pretty remote. So because of the history of Glastonbury and the whole kind of weird vibe that the mountain and all of that gives off, there's a lot of myths that have been created about the Bennington Triangle, about Glastonbury itself, which is understandable because there are a lot of creepy things that happen there, and the history is really rather dark if you kind of go back and look into it. Basically, it was kind of this town built up in the middle of nowhere. They were like in their own little area. They built these magnificent, I think there was like a casino, there was a like clubhouse. There were all these elaborate buildings. They built their own railroad. They had little outlying villages, and it was an up and coming thing until the logging industry and the charcoal industry really failed, and they were all forced to pretty much leave. So then it became like the shell of a town. So there's really not that much creepy about it, but it kind of sets the mood for a scary story or something out of some terrifying movie. The town did eventually go on to become part of this tourist thing where you could go and tour it, but then mudslides started taking over and most of the town ended up being destroyed, and all that's pretty much left are a few abandoned buildings, and the railroad system that they had put in place kind of just sits there rusting in the middle of this quiet forest. Now, while a lot of the ideas around Glastonbury and the Bennington Triangle itself are considered myths and really are kind of made up stories because it's such a perfect setting for it, there are plenty of people in the local area that believe most of what is said. And with the disappearances and the bizarre things that seem to happen in this area, you really can't blame them. When I was watching different stories and many documentaries about this Bennington Triangle location, I saw a lot of people in the comments saying, you know, I've lived here my whole life. I know this sounds stupid, but the second you come into this area, you just feel there's something different here. You feel a different vibe. And I know a lot of people don't really believe in that sort of thing, but I just saw comment after comment after comment after personal story, even in different articles of people that live in this area that say there is no way you could possibly understand what they're talking about unless you go there. So the main thing I'm kind of going to dive into today are the bizarre disappearances in the Bennington Triangle. And when I tell you that these are weird, and there's one in particular that freaks me out so bad, I'm not exaggerating, and I cannot wait until you hear them because it's some of the most bizarre, random disappearances that I've heard. So around 70 years ago, people mysteriously started disappearing in the Bennington Triangle. And the most notable similarities between all of the disappearances is that they all seem to happen between 3 and 4 p.m. and they all happen within the last 3 months of the year. And we all know how dangerous it is to make connections in different cases. I've gone on big spiels about this, but this like random time period and location, they all kind of disappeared in the same area around the same time, different years. I mean, it's definitely odd, and it was enough to really get people talking. The first disappearance occurred in 1945 when 74-year-old hunting guide named Mitty Rivers randomly vanished. Now, this is something that you will see reoccurring in the disappearances, is that a lot of these people were very skilled outdoorsmen, and when you live in this area, you kind of have to be because it's one of the only things there is to do. But anyway, she had been leading a group of 4 hunters around the Hell Hollows area southeast of Glastonbury when she suddenly became lost. Now, there's not a lot of details exactly on her disappearance, but she was reported missing, and it shocked a lot of people because of how incredibly knowledgeable she was, not only of climbing, but specifically the area that she was in. I mean, she was a guide. She's a guide for a reason. She also had great survival instincts, so they believe that, you know, even if she had been lost for a little bit, she was so familiar with the area and she was so capable of taking care of herself that she likely could have gotten herself out, or at least would have remained alive for a couple of days, pretty much long enough for her to be found. Over 300 locals and soldiers from the U.S. Army based in Fort Devens, along with police, searched for 8 straight days. They did grid searches. They searched every possible bit of land that they could have, and they found absolutely no sign of Mitty. And again, everyone was shocked because she wouldn't have ever wandered too deep into the woods. She would have at least started wandering towards something that she knew to be an exit. So the fact that nothing of her was ever found was incredibly bizarre to a lot of people. And considering these areas are hiked on a pretty regular basis, knowing she wouldn't have really gone far off any of the trails, they thought that for sure she would turn up eventually, but she just never did. And then one of the most famous missing persons cases in all of Vermont history, Paula Weldon was 18 years old and had been attending Bennington College at the time of her disappearance. She told her friends and her family that during her Thanksgiving break, she planned on going into the Bennington Triangle area and hopping on one of the trails for a short trek. And this wasn't something too odd. She was used to going into the woods. She was used to hiking, so no one thought much of it. On December 1st, 1946, at around 2:45 p.m., Paula headed off to the trail, and she entered the start of the trail by Glastonbury Mountain in a bright red shirt. And a lot of people kind of think about her attire. She was only wearing jeans, light socks, sneakers. She wasn't even really wearing a heavy jacket. She wasn't really wearing attire in general for hiking. A lot of people find that odd. I'm not sure what she normally would have worn, so obviously I can't speak on it. But either way, she never ended up making it out of the woods, and no one really noticed until classes resumed the following Monday and she didn't show up. This sparked a massive search, and again, they brought in all sorts of different agencies of law enforcement. They brought in all different aircraft. There was over 1,000 people searching the area for her, and there was a $5,000 reward offered for anyone who had any possible information on her disappearance. Despite searching for Paula, nothing of hers was ever found, and they had assumed that if she had ran into any sort of issue, maybe she was injured, maybe she had suffered from some sort of exhaustion, that they should easily be able to find her because she was in a red shirt and it was December and most of the leaves were gone. But unfortunately, it didn't seem to help them at all, so to this day, her case remains open and unsolved. There were a lot of people that have come forward that claim that they saw her running in the area that day. There's a couple that claim to have been walking behind her and said that she was just casually walking down the trail. I mean, people have seen her at gas stations. There's been all sorts of sightings, but no one has ever been able to confirm any of these. So for all we know, those either could have been fabricated to hype up the idea that the Bennington Triangle has something odd going on with it and makes people act oddly, but we really just don't know. And then the most bizarre disappearance out of them all, hands down, like when I read this I didn't believe it, it actually ended up happening 3 years to the day of Paula's disappearance. On December 1st of 1949, 68-year-old James Tedford boarded a bus to head to Bennington after visiting his relatives in St. Albans, Vermont. Now, this was not by any means a normal bus ride. James did in fact board the bus. Passengers saw it, the bus driver saw it, even the bus driver remembered exactly where he was sitting. Dozens of different witnesses, passengers saw where he was sitting, and the last time anyone remembers seeing him was after the last stop before Bennington. But somehow when they arrived to Bennington, James had vanished. He knew for sure there was no way James couldn't have gotten off at the previous stop. The bus driver did not see him get off, and again, everyone saw him in his seat afterwards. People remembered seeing him. So if that's the case, that means that somehow James disappeared while in a moving vehicle that had been traveling down Route 7 through Bennington Triangle. This wasn't like, oh, you know, his loved ones were there, he didn't show up off the bus. This was the drivers and the passengers had all seen him, and they all had acknowledged his presence, and they immediately realized he wasn't there and had no idea where he would have gone. So they started to really think, you know, maybe we're wrong. Did we really see him get off on that? Did we forget it? So they went to his seat to try to see if there was any sign of him there, and sure enough, all of James' luggage was still sitting in his seat. Even the piece of paper with the bus route was in his seat that he had been holding and looking at. So literally, this man disappeared off of a moving vehicle, surrounded by dozens and dozens of people. To this day, James has never been found, never came to gather any of his items. Not a single person can make sense of any of this, and everyone that was there still strongly sticks to the story that he vanished in between bus stops, despite the fact that they know that doesn't make a logical bit of sense. That is probably one of the weirdest of the Bennington Triangle disappearances. The fact that someone can vanish like that in front of dozens of people and not a single person, even authorities, can explain it, and all of his stuff was there, everything that belonged to him, proven to belong to him, was still on the bus. It absolutely makes no sense, and there has never been any tips, leads, absolutely nothing. Unexplainable. And then a year later, in October of 1950, an 8-year-old named Paul Jepson also mysteriously vanished. And this is another one of the kind of bizarre ones. The other ones were strange because they did vanish kind of in the middle of nowhere, walked into the woods, never came back. That's like legitimately one of my biggest fears. But this one doesn't really make a lot of sense. So Paul had been out with his mom, and she stopped to take care of some of the pigs that they owned. So he decided to stay in their car, and she was only probably a couple 100 feet away from him, taking care of these pigs. She was only stopped at this area for a couple of minutes. She looked back and saw him. He was playing in the car, laughing, having a good time, safe inside the vehicle. She turned back around for no more than a minute, and when she looked back, Paul was gone. Hundreds of people came to search for Paul, including a local bloodhound, and the bloodhound actually did end up picking up a scent from the vehicle, almost as if Paul had gotten out and then walked over to this trail at a nearby crossroads. But at this trail right by the crossroads, the scent was lost. So authorities believed he had gotten out of the vehicle, maybe was lured in by someone driving by, and the person took him and drove off. But the weirdest thing about this is that his mom was not far away from him. She didn't hear the car door open. She didn't hear the car door shut. Literally absolutely nothing. She didn't hear him walking, and she only turned her back for a minute. But despite the fact that they believed this was some sort of abduction, Paul's dad had a completely different idea of what was going on. So in the few days before Paul's disappearance, he had apparently nonstop been speaking about the lure of the mountains. And while he loved the outdoors, he loved to be in the mountains, loved to be in the woods, it was very odd and stuck out to them that this 8-year-old little boy was telling his parents that the mountains were calling to him. And this is kind of a big part of the myth aspect of the mountains, is that you're drawn in by them. They have this lure and then you just never escape them. But either way, to this day, Paul has never, ever, ever been found. Not a body, not anything. He was playing inside a safe vehicle one moment and then he was nowhere to be seen. 2 weeks later, a 53-year-old woman named Frieda Langer went missing on a trail in Somerset bordering the east side of Glastonbury. Now, just like the hunting guide, she was a very, very experienced climber, hiker. She was a survivalist, and she was familiar with almost every area of the woods that she was in. She had been hiking with her cousin and her husband, I think the day before, had injured his knee, so he decided to stay back at the campsite to rest. So Frieda ended up going out with her cousin, and only half a mile into their hike, she ended up falling into a stream and got soaking wet, so she decided to go ahead and turn back around, head back to the camp, and change. Now, after a while of not returning back to her cousin decided to go back and check at the camp. But when he arrived there, Frieda's husband was there, still resting, and he was shocked to hear that Frieda had never returned back to the camp. They couldn't figure out where she would have gone. She knew exactly how to get back to the camp. After all, she'd also only walked about half a mile, so it should have only taken maybe like a little over 10 minutes to get back to the campsite. It was a very straight shot, and her cousin had also walked back on the same exact route she would have taken to get back to the campsite and saw absolutely no sign of her, no sign of a struggle, nothing. So they immediately decided to call authorities and report her a missing person. Authorities sent out helicopters, the Coast Guard, and the US Army all to search for Frieda, and they even used local aircraft in the community, as well as 400 different community members that offered to help search the entire area where she was thought to have gone missing. Despite their desperate search efforts, nothing seemed to be found of Frieda in this tiny half-a-mile span until about 6 months later. This is the only case in the Bennington Triangle disappearances that a body has actually been found. And even the circumstances in which this body was found didn't really make a lot of sense. Frieda's body was found near the Somerset Reservoir, which was strange in itself because this wasn't really an area she would have been going towards. And on top of this, it was a very, very open area, and they'd actually searched this area in particular, right where her body was found, at least a dozen times, and up until this moment, her body hadn't been there. And despite finding her body, it was so badly decomposed that they were not able to find a cause of death, and only added to all of the speculation, especially surrounding the Bennington Triangle. So many people to this day say this and the James case are the strangest out of all of the disappearances. How on earth was an area where she was found searched dozens of times? They would have seen her. It was an open area. I think it had taller grass, but she couldn't have been concealed at all. So how did she end up there afterwards? Did she maybe go wandering off in the wrong direction? It's not like they only searched this during the first week, so she could have walked off and then come back and maybe was trying to find her way back. They searched this a couple of times throughout the 6-month period, and they didn't find her. And there's no way she could have survived out off-grid like that with no supplies, not being prepared for around 5 or 6 months, and then suddenly was dead. And on top of that, she had been dead for quite a while because of her decomposition. She had been there, or at least been deceased for an extended period of time. So how on earth, if they had just checked it probably only a month or two before, did she all of a sudden show up there? But these are only the bizarre disappearances and the one death, and that isn't even all that the Bennington Triangle is known for. So now I'm going to be diving a little bit deeper into the paranormal, I guess you could say, and myth side of the Bennington Triangle. So I actually read an article about someone's experience with the Bennington Triangle, and I have it linked down below. So this man left the Bennington area to go towards Somerset, and when he left Bennington, it was 55 degrees. It was kind of peak leaf season, so everyone was kind of going out looking at leaves. There wasn't any snow yet, so it also wasn't very cold. It was just kind of brisk. But by the time he reached Somerset, out of nowhere, it just began dumping snow, which he remembers being very odd because, again, the temperature was 55 degrees when he left Bennington, which isn't even that far away. But this was like one of the strangest things to him when he first arrived, and he started heading up towards the mountain. And he remembers getting out into this clearing, and he saw a man pretty far away. It looked like he had a gun slung over his shoulder, which wasn't too odd at first. It was hunting season, and it's the mountains in the middle of the woods. There presumably were plenty of deer, but the weirdest thing he thought was that even from such a far distance, he could tell that the man was standing there, but the man was watching him approach. And he kept on driving and kept on driving, assuming the guy would, maybe walk somewhere else or wave at him or smile. But the entire time, this man just continuously was staring at him in his car, didn't smile at him, didn't wave at him, absolutely nothing. So that was bizarre occurrence number 2. Now next, he ended up passing by a cemetery, which also was very weird because this is like a state park now, and people don't live up there. It's very odd that there's a cemetery up there, but he figured it was just from a long time ago, and he kept on passing. And then the next thing he saw was a campsite. Now, this campsite, he said, was probably one of the most odd things that he saw up there because all the tents were fully up. It appeared as if this site had just pretty much been constructed, but there were no people there, and based on the state of the campfires, it appeared as if whoever was there left in a hurry and had been there recently but just booked it. So that was strange at all. So finally he decided to turn around and head back down the mountain, and he decided on his way down to stop at the cemetery. Now, he wanted to see the gravestones, see what the dates on everything were, really check out the area. So he ended up getting out of the car, but he left the car on and he left the radio on really, really low. He didn't want to turn the car off because A, there was a strange man with a gun that just seemed to be acting odd in the area, and on top of that there were these campers and he wasn't sure of them, and this place is known for being eerie. And after a while of looking at the different tombstones, he all of a sudden starts hearing something strange on the radio. So he ends up going back to his car to head all the way back down the mountain, and when he turns the radio up, he said he can't even begin to describe what he heard. He heard 3 people, and he wasn't even sure if he wanted to label it talking. It just sounded like babbling nonsense, and they would exchange taking turns doing like high shrieks, like screaming, giggling, laughing, and it was so creepy that he just bolted down the mountain and left. And when he got back to the town, he was telling people about these occurrences that he experienced, especially the bizarre things coming over the radio, and realized that he was not the only person to have that experience. Now again, if you're not into kind of creepy stories and you don't believe in things like that, obviously that sounds crazy, but the weirdest thing about it is that a lot of people that don't know much about the Bennington Triangle will go into it and come out with these stories not having any prior knowledge as to what had happened before. So then there's another strange occurrence. In October of 2008, again, in the last 3 months, it all happens in that time period, a man named Robert Singley got lost in the Bennington Triangle, but he managed to find his way out, and his story is terrifying and so incredibly confusing. And this also kind of comes with the lure of the mountain, the lure of the woods myth that's out there. So he headed out for a simple day hike, and he went on the same trail that Paula Weldon had gone on. So the same trail the girl went on during college break and never managed to get out, and that almost makes this so much creepier. So he decided to hike up to Bald Mountain, which is a very popular place on the trail, and then he decided to walk along the ridge towards Glastonbury. He took some time to check out the white rocks to the west, and then decided to go ahead and head east, head back to his car so he could go home, because again, it was getting late. He was right in between this 3 and 4 time period, and he was done, so he headed back. After about 5 miles, he started to question what was going on, because from where he planned his hike, and it was something he was used to doing, it should have only been about 3 miles for him to get back to his car from the white rocks. But he assumed at this point again it had been 5, and his car was absolutely nowhere to be found. So at this point it was getting cold, it was getting late, he wasn't prepared to stay overnight, he was not dressed to stay overnight, so he decided it wasn't safe to try to find his car any longer, and he needed to just find somewhere to rest. And that is when he saw this giant maple tree, and he says he remembers vividly in his mind like seeing this one tree, and it was so big and captivating that it almost seemed like it was the only tree around, and he was drawn straight to it. Now he remembers specifically struggling for a while to fall asleep because it was really cold outside, it was really wet outside, and he finally was able to fall asleep. But when he woke up is when he was really struck with sheer terror. He realized that he was actually on the other side of the ridge from where he had believed he was the night before. And not just kind of on the other side of the ridge, but 7 miles on the other side of the ridge. He vividly remembered checking and making sure and confirming he was on the right trail, but when he got up from where he was sleeping and started walking around, he found the maple tree, which he remembered. But when he saw other parts of the trail, it seemed completely foreign to him, as if he had never seen it the day before. But he was so confused because in his mind, he remembered every single thing from the day before. He remembered the trail that he took, but where he was nothing like anything that he remembered. He was walking back across to the other side of the ridge that he somehow ended up getting on, and he saw all these trees up and blocking the trail that he was having to step over to get past, and he didn't remember any of those things from the day before, and he cannot make absolutely any sense of it. And he remembers all of this vividly, and he says there were a few moments in time where all of a sudden he would feel kind of weird and hazy, but it's not like he had been out there and was suffering from any of the elements. It wasn't like he was sick. He still remembers all these things, so no one can really even explain it. There was even a mysterious plane crash. 31-year-old Ramsey Ani took a 1975 twin-engine Piper out to fly, and he had 6 years of flying experience. It's not like this is something he wasn't used to doing. So he left from Heritage Aviation in Burlington International Airport and was supposed to head to Oxford, Connecticut. Now at 3:30 p.m. he had been having a fairly average flight and was flying over, you guessed it, Bennington Triangle, when for absolutely no reason they lost total track of the plane. They had no idea where it went. It dropped off of all of the radars. It's like he vanished into thin air over Bennington Triangle. Authorities searched for hours in the general area because they weren't really sure where he went down, because they just lost signal, but that didn't necessarily mean that's exactly where he had possibly crashed. And sure enough, at around 1 a.m. the plane ended up being found in the woods on Bald Mountain. They have no idea what caused the plane crash. The pilot of the plane did end up passing away in the accident, but there's no reason as to why. They checked over the entire plane and everything seemed fine. The weather was good. There seemed to be no issues. He wasn't complaining of anything odd. Literally, he drove over Bennington Triangle, lost contact, and then the plane crashed. Now, there are so many different theories when it comes to the Bennington Triangle, and since there are little answers to almost every single occurrence in the Bennington Triangle, it really leaves a lot of room for very, very wide speculation. And a lot of people kind of have a heyday with this. So there's a lot of people on the side that there has to be something paranormal going on, and then there's a lot of people that have said this is just a lot of bad luck around all at the same time. One of the most well-known theories is that there's some type of paranormal force at work here. This place is also well known and has been for a very long period of time for UFO sightings. There's actually a lot of people that search this particular area for Bigfoot. A ton of people believe Bigfoot is in this area. There have been Bigfoot sightings. Basically, paranormal things in this area have not ever been taken lightly, and it's like the more things that happen, the more these people feel like this is such a strong possibility. There's even something called the window theory that was brought forward by a man named John Kell. Now, I haven't personally looked into a lot of this particular theory, but the idea states that there are areas such as the Bennington Triangle where there's basically a gateway between our universe and another universe. And kind of like the barrier between us and other universes and other dimensions is very thin in these areas and creates these windows. So this man personally believes that all of these people just fell through time and space. And while this seems like a very, very wild out there theory, it actually kind of is backed up by ancient native stories that Glastonbury was cursed. Now this is another thing though that kind of falls into the myth category. A lot of things have been created about ancient native grounds and, you know, curses and cursed land and burial sites and all these things. And no one really knows for sure if this is just something made up or if it's true, because a lot of the different people in the specific area have told stories personally from things they've heard from, you know, their grandparents and ancestors that have passed down, that the natives in the area, when they originally settled, they wouldn't put any of their tribes on this land. They said that there was a giant curse over the land and that the only way to deal with the curse, because they couldn't do anything about it, was to simply never set foot in the area. And a lot of people believed it's because when people did step foot in the area, they would vanish. So this possibly could date back to long ago, and also kind of supports this window theory that people are just kind of stepping into this window and vanishing without a trace. Obviously, those are like the most out there theories when it comes to the Bennington Triangle. And there's a lot of logical people who say it still doesn't explain a lot of things, but you can't help but really question kind of the strange nature of a lot of these disappearances. Like, how on earth did a man vanish on the middle of a moving vehicle with dozens of people around him? How did this little boy, you know, vanish within only a minute of being in his parents' car and no one heard or saw anything? You know, he was speaking about being lured to the mountains, and it also doesn't explain that a lot of people in the area say there is just this weird feeling around it. Now granted, that could be caused by just this like spooky story surrounding it, because even when you know something might not be real, if it sounds creepy, sometimes you still get goosebumps. I feel like it could also be the same kind of thing. So now on to people who don't believe in such things, and they're really chalking it up to potentially be a serial killer, and this is a logical explanation. All the missing persons vanished between 1945 and 1950, but honestly, that's the only real evidence pointing to the fact that a serial killer was basically just roaming this area at the time. Usually serial killers have specific targets. There doesn't really seem to be a pattern like that here. There are people ranging from ages of 8 to 74, you know, all across the board, and even where these people disappeared from are kind of split down the middle. Some disappeared in the forest, 2 were taken from vehicles. It just doesn't explain a lot. And then how would a serial killer have managed to take this old man off of a bus? Granted, all these don't have to be connected, and that's where clumping cases together kind of comes to play again here, because some of these maybe are the victims of a killer. Maybe the more crazy ones are just wild, strange disappearances, and maybe they're not really all connected, they just happen to seem connected. But the worst part of that is that there are things dating back to years before all of this happened. I mean, people escaping mental hospitals and thought to have been running wild in the area. They've got so many other theories here that unfortunately I just am not able to really get into because there's just so many of them. There's like someone they call a rock man that comes and takes people. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. And I mean, years and years ago, so many strange things were thought to have happened on this land between multiple people. There were a couple people that showed up dead on the land, but the way they died was very bizarre. Then the most logical logical theory to a lot of people is that the wildlife just got to some of these people. But the issue with this is that the main source and the largest source of wildlife in this area are lynx and bobcats, and they aren't particularly known for attacking or being overly aggressive to humans. They're known for more avoiding them, so it doesn't make sense again. And it seems like every single logical explanation can easily be ruled out, and it seems like some of the wildest ones almost seem the most possible. But is it kind of a situation of, because nothing logical makes sense, you kind of force something illogical to make sense? Do you get what I'm saying here? It's definitely just super, super strange, and it was interesting diving deep into this. I definitely suggest you guys go and do more research, because there are a ton of different theories out there that I haven't even gotten into. It's just very, very, very weird. So definitely go ahead and do your own research on this. I feel like this is a great topic to go at from either the perspective of, oh, something paranormal is happening, or man, this is like a huge mystery that has a lot of questionable variables in it. So I hope you guys kind of got the best of both worlds and I satisfied both sides here. I'm definitely interested to see what side you're on down in the comments. Do you think this is a paranormal thing, or do you think we just haven't figured out what's happening to these people, that they're just going out there and it's as simple as them getting lost and somehow no one manages to find them? After all, that's not really that out of the ordinary. But that is it, you guys, for me. Thank you so much for participating in Halloween Week. Thank you so much for watching and commenting and liking and sending so much love my way and suggesting your friends and family watch this with you. I've had an absolute blast, and I hope you guys have too. I could never be more thankful for you guys. I kid you not, I have the best group of subscribers that I have seen of any channel. So massive thanks to you guys, massive hugs to you guys, and I'll make sure to do something like this for you again soon, because you guys loved it and I absolutely loved it. But guys, I'm gonna go ahead and go. I am tired after a week of content and I'm ready for a little bit of a break this weekend. So please don't forget to hit the like button, especially on a video like today where it's something different that I'm kind of branching out on, because as I said, I would love to incorporate more of this content into my regular schedule. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to become a member of the Hallan fam if you are not already, and I will see you guys in my next video, which unfortunately isn't until next Saturday, but I will see you guys then. Bye.